about the Baylor Bears basketball team or something left to my own devices. So I'm going to read, or at least refer to a few notes. I'm a volunteer with Capital City Village. We are honored to call Michael Barnes our friend. Several years ago, the executive director, Tommy, and I met Michael Barnes at Seven Flags in South Austin for an introduction and also some coffee. Michael was charming. Michael was engaging. He was friendly. And most of all, he is a good listener. And that is a marvelous attribute for a journalist and a writer. He grew up in Houston, Texas. He graduated from the Strake Jesuit College Prep. I mention that because it's important. It's important. That education is important for a man who is a humanitarian and an advocate for diversity and social justice in our beloved Austin. He then went on to the University of Houston. He got a degree in drama and history. In 1984, he moved to Austin to earn a master's degree and a PhD from UT in theater history and criticism. In addition to being a busy columnist and author, he teaches at several area universities. He presents seminars, and he's involved in all manner of media communications and activities. Michael has earned numerous rewards and honors, too many to mention. You can check Google, there's a long list. Through his research and storytelling abilities, Michael introduces the reader to people, places, cultures, and history of Austin and Texas, whether you have been here forever, or for half a century, or for only a year. There is value in following Michael Barnes' writings and books as he links old Austin to new Austin, bringing the past into the present. Michael, we're so glad you've joined us this afternoon. We look forward to learning when volume 4 of Indelible Austin shall be available, and we are eager to hear your remarks followed by a Q&A. And we do thank you for joining us this afternoon. And ladies and gent, here's our very good friend, Michael Barnes.
Thank you, Linda. I don't think I've had a more flattering introduction ever. It's kind of hard to drink all that in. And thank you to Capital City Village for inviting me again. And even after my first time, you invited me back. That's pretty amazing. I will expand a little bit on my background and what the subject today. I was asked to speak about how I put together my histories of Austin and the stories that appear in print in the American Statesman, online at statesman.com and austin360.com. Also the podcast, Austin Found, which is a free weekly podcast that I do with J.B. Hager. And you can find it wherever, for free, wherever podcasts are acquired. And also there's a free weekly digital newsletter called Think Texas that is about Texas history. Usually has about 25 or so points of entry every week. Comes out on Tuesdays, and you can sign up for that at the newsletters page at statesman.com. And again, it's free. Linda mentioned kindly my 3 books and the fact that a 4th is coming out. I just handed over the manuscript edited to my publisher and at Waterloo Press. And if you have not been exposed to them before, they're collections of my better history columns So they're very accessible and digestible, and they also help to put all of these different individual stories into context because they're arranged thematically rather than chronologically. The first was Indelible Austin 1. And I hold these up because I'm required by contract to do that. 2 and 3. And you know, they can be found all over town, but I recommend usually Book People, not only because they're independent, but because they're really efficient at getting them to you. You can order them online at their site. They'll ship them to you. They have safe sidewalk delivery, and also on a limited basis, they're open for regular browsing and so forth. Yeah, I try to avoid nostalgia. I try to link the past with the present, maybe too much sometimes. I will tell you that I was looking at the reviews of our Austin Found podcast yesterday on one platform, Apple or Google, and noted that we had a rating from listeners of like 98% positive. And I went, well, I'm interested in what the 2% were saying. And so I went and looked, and there was someone who said, there's too much white guilt, that he mentions race in every story. It's like, race is part of our history. I don't have an agenda here other than the truth and getting as close to the truth as possible. And virtually every historical story, whether it's in Austin or anywhere in this country, has a racial angle to it. So we try not to avoid serious subjects. On the podcast, JB is a radio personality, so we have a good time. We laugh a lot. We try to see the fun in almost everything, but we also tell a warts and all history of Austin, and I think that got under that one person's skin. I am going to briefly talk today about how I get these stories, where they come from, and how I get them onto the page or onto the screen. The people part of it is rather complicated these days, but I've been doing it for 30 years, so I've figured out a process. Generally, when I'm talking to people who have lived through history, and I've interviewed a lot of people who are over 100 years old, and you know, I'm always interested in what they have to say. Somebody who can remember the early 1920s, that's my kind of person. And only one could remember the teens really well, could remember soldiers marching at Camp Mabry during World War I. That's Richard Overton. He died at age 112. So generally, I will hear from someone who is of a younger generation. They'll say, I have a relative or somebody I'm caring for, or a friend, and they tell some great stories about the Depression. They tell great stories about the floods in Austin or something, and we're teaching in a one-room Black country school and before electrification and stuff like that. So I'll go, well, that's interesting, and I'll go meet the person, and I'll ask some respectful questions and listen mostly. And then I don't take notes usually during the first meeting, and then I process it and set up another interview, and then that time I take notes. And crucially, I don't write down my thoughts. I write down what the person says, and only what they say. And because I want to capture the voice, and I want to stick to their facts as they see them as much as possible. Because the next thing I do is I go and do the contextual research, and I dig into the archives. I ask experts. I talk to people who might have also experienced some of the same things, not because I don't trust my subject's memory, but I don't trust anybody's memory. I don't trust my memory. Just moments ago, while I was rebooting the computer, I went to go get my coffee out of the microwave, and instead I opened the cabinet where we keep the cookbooks to get my coffee out. So I'm, that happens all the time. So memory is a funny thing, and there have been many, many books written about it. And I am always surprised when someone says, yes, but I remember it so well. And, you are not old enough to have remembered Abraham Lincoln or something, it's usually not that extreme, but sometimes. And so then I start the writing process. And as I'm doing that, I send lists of quotes and facts to the ambassador from that person's family or whatever friend. And I asked them to carefully look at it and to not to be concerned with style or opinion, but just fact check things. And almost always they have something. I'm always surprised if they don't have anything, because I can write something down wrong. I could transcribe it wrong. I could misunderstand what they said. And I usually do something. And I'm glad I have the time to do that kind of checking. So when the story does come out and it goes through various editorial levels, and sometimes there's more reporting to do, and of course, gathering of images. But, and these days, one of the things that's part of the process is search engine optimization. And we have a regional digital team that completely repackages my story so that it's more presentable for those searching for stories online. And we used to have to do that ourselves, but now we have specialists do it for us. So the response that I most appreciate getting back from my historical subjects, if it's a person, is thank you for letting me tell my story. And the subtext of that is, thank you for getting out of the way of my story and not showing off your knowledge and your style, and just being a kind of a transparent window through which that person's story was told. As for places, like almost all journalists, I like to go to the place I'm writing about. So if it's a part of town that I don't know well, or even if I do, I want to go to where was the house where she grew up? Where was the little corner grocery store that he worked at? And if it's part of the Texas subject, of course, I want to go on a road trip. And so I love going and finding the sites of not just the big historical things, the mega historical things like battle sites or where a mission was or something, but just where a high school used to be in Brazos County. And that was one of my favorite subjects on Think Texas, because people are just constantly asking me questions and I'll do research. And someone wanted to know the location where her mother's high school was in Brazos County. And there really was virtually nothing on it out there. And that finally I triangulated a lot of sources to get to the place where it is and looked at it on Google Earth and all that kind of stuff, and can see the ruins of the place. And then later the person who owns the land said, yeah, I'll let you come out and look at it. So, and that's been very valuable along the way. Someone had read something where I talked about I was about to go trace the James River from its source to its mouth. They said, we own the land where the source is. And that's amazing, because I did this project for about 10 years where a buddy and I traced the sources, 50 Texas rivers from their sources to their mouths by car, on foot, and sometimes in the water. And the sources of virtually all rivers are on private land, and the mouths, a lot of them are as well. So we were able to get close to the rivers many, many times, but the sources and the mouths were tough. So again, the places, basically, I want to be there and see it. And the response of one person, a young reader, who said, and this just took me by surprise. It said, you must see the city in a different way because, and I said, how so? And I said, well, when you look at something, you can see what was there before and what happened there before. And I had never really thought of it that way, but that's true. Depending on the area of town, if I've spent enough time there, and I find out when I do my walks every day, sometimes I'll have a companion and I go, in that house and that house and that place and that used to be and blah, blah, blah. And I go, by the end of it, I'm like, how do I know all this stuff? Well, I've been spending 30 years writing about it. So, and asking questions and, for instance, and stepping outside of my mostly introverted self and going up to people and asking. Where I live in Bolden in South Austin, it used to be a freedom colony, a post-emancipation freedom colony. And there are still 2 now surviving African-American churches, St. Annie's and Goodwill Baptist. And so I'll go up and their congregations are, like all urban congregations, are dwindling. And it's down to just a few church ladies, and I'll go up when they're going into service and ask them questions. And one of them, I at Goodwill, I had talked to them for a long time, and even gotten a lead on somebody who lived in the neighborhood for about 101 years. And I passed by her every day, and she would never respond to my good morning. You know, I said, well, I'm gathering all this because I'd like to write about it in the newspaper. And to one, they said, no, we don't want to be in the newspaper. Don't write about us. And of course, I can't blame them because for so long, mainstream media was not to be trusted in certain communities because we would only report on crimes or terrible things and never really reported in depth on their lives. And so now, so that's people, places, culture. I like to see any kind of cultural trends, changes in culture, shifts in culture. I have continued to be the main arts writer at the Statesman while doing this as well. Most of that has to do with what we would consider high culture, you know, classical music, theater, dance, architecture, art. But I try to find, you know, what are the stories behind the stories. And I am very much interested in the kinds of cultural artifacts that are, and the shared culture today of any community. And so, and my people who have different definitions of culture when they're using it colloquially, I just think of it as what the glue that holds us together. And so I'm interested in reporting on any of that. And a lot of it has to do with my age, is that just being 66, I can remember when Czech was the 4th most spoken language in Texas, or I can remember when the rock and roll was considered race music, or I have that memory personally. And so I'm always alert to and sensitive to shifts in culture like that. And as far as history is concerned, I've always been fascinated with it. The first kind of big hardcover book that I read straight through was my 7th grade Texas history textbook. I'd be horrified by it now because of so many of the myths that were passed along and are still being passed along in Texas history. But you know, now I know, as a historian myself, how that can happen, because you can only read your history through what you know and what you've read and what you've explored. And so I don't in any way belittle the textbook writers from 1960 something. And but the history, the reason why Texas history got to me right away is because I could go to it. I was the little kid, eldest of 6, and insist that we pack up the station wagon and go to Goliad and go to, whatever site that I thought was important. And I must have been pretty annoying because we did go, and my parents must have been really nice.
I cannot put it in the refrigerator.
So and also with Texas history and Austin history, I can talk to the people who lived it or whose parents or great grandparents lived it, and I can't do that with history in some distant spot. At one point, my doctoral dissertation subject was going to be in the area of theater history and criticism, the influence of Portuguese Jesuit drama on the French neoclassical plays of Racine. What was I thinking? First of all, who would want to read that? But second, even though I did get a fellowship to go and travel around Europe and do some research, it was just so abstract. And the history here in our city and our state is very concrete, and of course it's not over. It's always affecting who we are and what we're doing now. And any subject that comes up in the public discourse has an historical angle, and in this last year, I've noticed a lot more people paying attention to history and sometimes getting it very wrong. But for instance, every story about COVID, eventually there's some mention of the much bigger Spanish flu epidemic, pandemic of 1918 and 1919. And one of the things that my stories keep trying to emphasize is that back then they knew about masking and quarantines and washing hands and all the stuff, social distancing. They knew about all that. And yet we're still arguing about it today. And that's because there was this collective amnesia about this huge pandemic that changed America and changed the world, but people conveniently forgot about it. Not conveniently, but just because it didn't have the same way of conceptualizing it that, say, for instance, a war has, or a great economic upheaval has. So, but anyway, yeah, our knowledge of our history, our way of shaping our conversation now, it all comes from trying to get at the truth of history. And part of my job is to remind people that what is the truth that we can know and what we don't yet know. And one of the most controversial things in Austin history is the Austin city plan of 1928. I can guarantee you that almost no one who brings it up in conversation or in their letters to the editor have actually read it. It's a really boring and technocratic land use study, and yet a huge amount of our history now, in terms of trying to figure out where we got to today in terms of race relations, have to do with people thinking that it all started in 1928, and there were some evil city leaders who decided that we needed a Negro district in East Austin. And that grossly oversimplifies it. It doesn't absolve the leaders for approving the plan without thinking that through. But it's not as simple as most people try to make it. And I'll just wrap up the prepared remarks with that is, always be skeptical, always ask questions, always be open to all the different historical evidence around you, all the people, the places, the culture, the history, it's never settled. I'm always amused by the use of the term revisionist history. It's like, well, that's revisionist history. Well, all history is revisionist because it's constantly being revised. It's constantly being updated. We get new information and new ways of understanding the information we already had. And we are never, it never ends. And it's one of the things I like about it. And the more that I do the Austin and the Texas history, the more I understand. But the more I understand what I don't know. And that's kind of a cliche, I guess, but I'm happy to say it continues to be the case in my heart. I have a friend who said, you just like learning too much. You forget everything that you already know so you could learn it again, wouldn't you? There's a little bit of truth in that. I do love learning, and I do love figuring out puzzles about our world. And I'm going to say that's it and open it up for questions and comments.
All right, thanks so much, Michael. So I'm going to just suggest, folks, that if you have some questions, you can either type them in the chat section. Now, all of our other participants are currently muted, so if you want to use the raise hand option under reactions, you can do that. Or if you want to simply unmute and check in with a question, feel free to go ahead.
I have a question.
Stan had a question. Unmute Stan. Unmute yourself, Stan.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Stan.
Okay, Michael, my name is Stan Brooks. Our family moved here from Elgin in 1926. At the time, I was only 4 years old. My question relates to the fact that in 1970, I believe it was, the American Statesman put out an edition which included editions from the Democratic Statesman in the 1870s. I assume that's in your Statesman library. You have heard about it, haven't you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. One of the things that I recall was that there was when the tower lights had been installed, a fellow by the name of, I believe, Gene Fowler decided on a dare to climb one, and he got just about to the top and he slipped and fell and survived with only a few broken bones because he hit some guy wires on the way down. Had you heard that story?
Yes, sir. Let me elaborate on both of your questions. We were founded as the Democratic Statesman in July 26, 1871. And we're currently celebrating our 150th anniversary as a newspaper. And I've done a series on that history of the newspaper. And one of the things that the very first installment in that series addressed was the fact that we were established in order to bring back white supremacy. The Democratic Party, we were represented the conservative wing of the Democratic Party in the state. And the idea was to take us back to the social and political situation of prior to the Civil War. And I had warned the leaders, the publisher and the editor, when they said, let's do a year-long series of histories of our paper, and I said, well, the first thing you're going to have to address is that we started out as pretty racist. And so I carefully gleaned ideas from that first evidence from that first edition from 1871, and then looked at it as the paper developed over the years. And by the time you get into the 20th century, while we were supporting conservative Democratic candidates, we were also supporting progressive candidates and business Democratic candidates. Not many Republicans back then. There weren't many. And but by the 1920s, when the Statesman and the American merged, American newspapers in general had dropped their affiliations to particular political parties, in part because they wanted the advertising and the readership of everyone. And so from that point on, we became what is typically called a mainstream daily newspaper, and have remained so since then. On the subject of that Moon Tower accident, one of the acute codas to that story is he went on to live a full life. And then I think he had some other bizarre escapes from death as well later in his life. He moved out to Arizona, if memory serves. But yeah, there have been other people who've scaled them. There was one guy in East Austin who went up, I think with his baby. And he was having a domestic dispute or something. And the parish priest talked him down. And in fact, the Moon Tower at the end of our block over here at South First and Monroe, there was a climber one day, and everybody gathered out, and the fire people came and all that, and you're just like, why are we all out here? We could be watching some horrible end to the story. I really don't want to see that, but yeah. So it's a temptation. I remember in grad school, people talking about going out and climbing one, and I'm terrified of heights, so that wasn't going to happen.
Well, there was a time you could climb to the dome of the Capitol, and they've
That's terrifying too. Yeah.
My older brother and I went on up there, and I was sort of misbehaving a little bit, I assume. And he threatened to throw me over the railing, and a lady there started fussing at him, and he wasn't going to do it, and I knew that, but the lady didn't.
Well, it was very unsafe, if my memory of it from childhood is that there was nothing protecting you from just plunging all the way down. And these days, I don't think any public entity would allow that.
Well, they've had these iron stairways that sort of wound up to the
Yeah,
top.
I remember that.
Michael, I think Gail Smith had a question. Gail, if you want to unmute, and then I'll read a couple from the chat section.
Okay.
I just had a question totally different. Kind of what's your thinking on the changes in Austin over the last 15, 20 years? It seems like, the city's just changing daily. And do you have anything really to say about that? I know you've seen many, many changes since you've been here.
Absolutely. And I can only imagine those people who've been here all their lives and or older than I am. I've only been here since '84, but absolutely the changes have been enormous. Some of them have been very positive. Some of them have not been, but I think what defines Austin's character are its people. And as I've said before, and I may bore you with this, I identified years ago the characteristics as being open, smart, kind, fun, and fit not in a cosmetic way, but inside out, in the sense that ready to engage with the world. I still find that to be the case. And I had dinner last night with 3 young men who have started their own tequila company, and we were singing out in a beautiful patio in a new restaurant on South Congress. Just a magical setting. The name of the place is Summer House, and it's in the Hotel Magdalena, which is part of the Music Lane development. And I was able to say to him, this place used to be the Terrace Motel. I know some of you remember that. And it was ultra modern back in the 1950s and 60s. And my parents spent their honeymoon right on that spot in 1952, I guess. And so they were amazed, and they're 40-ish. And but we were able to say, you know, why did they settle here? 2 of the young men were from Guadalajara, Mexico, and 1 grew up here, but why were they here? And they said the same things that I've heard all along, which it's the people. And in starting their company here, launching their tequila here, everybody, including people that are potential competitors, have helped them and have just said, sure, what do you need? You know, you need an introduction to this restaurant, whatever, here you go. So that's what is still defining about the city to me. That wouldn't happen on the West Coast. It wouldn't happen on the East Coast. It wouldn't happen in the South of the upper Midwest either, really, unless you fit in. But the material, the physical city is, of course, changed radically, and it seems to have sped up just in the last year. I guess because I haven't been out as much to witness the changes, but building and towers just seem to go up overnight, and there are things that are lost in that. Absolutely. I think we've done a good job of saving a lot of our historical infrastructure, and there's more work to be done there. But the, you know, where it was used to be surface parking lots and empty warehouses, now 50-story towers. You know, the change in the cost of living is hard to sustain. I like that we pay attention to that, and we try to help the people who need the most help. And but honestly, there's nothing you can do about that if you've created this wonderful, beautiful green city that is forward-thinking and thoughtful about inequity and the needs of its citizens. Then people are going to come, and the alternative is often decay, and you start worrying when people don't come. You know? So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's my general summation of those things. And it's changing all the time. I when asked this maybe 2 years ago, I would have said, well, all my new neighbors are really interested in the city around them, and they're interested in us and interested in sharing things. I would say now, not all of them. And I'm not sure what that's about. Part of it may be that they're really in a completely different economic class than we are, because we moved into Bolden when, you know, $165,000 bungalow sounded like the most expensive thing in the world. And now a house 2 doors down went for 2.1 million. So these are not the same people that lived here before or moved in before. I have a really sweet friend, young friend in her 30s, who said, I looked y'all up on TCAD, y'all are rich. And I said, no, we're not rich. The people moving in here and buying things are rich. We're just sitting on some property that maybe someday will help us go to the, the home.
One of the changes, Michael, relative to that is when I was a boy, Austin was known as the friendly city.
Right.
Because of its number of people here, you could walk a block and almost certainly see someone you knew. And now it's the weird, which I have a hard time accepting, by the way.
I think it's still friendly, and I don't think it's ever been that weird. I think that was, both of those, by the way, are Chamber of Commerce slogans.
Oh, yeah.
Those are not, they're not exactly historically accurate. I've never thought we were that weird a city. We have a tolerance for eccentricity, but there's not that much eccentricity around, and we're still a friendly city, I think. You just don't know everybody.
I wanted to chime in. I know we've got a couple of questions in the chat section. I'm going to go ahead and throw two of them at you. First one, just really quickly, did you publish your findings about the 50 rivers that you explored? And then the other one, a follow-up from L.R. Shanblum. Michael, your columns and stories have been one of the best parts of The Statesman, especially this past year. And as the paper goes more to national news feeds and, of course, sports, how do you see print newspapers surviving as many have closed?
Okay. Are any of y'all getting a little feedback? Yeah. Sorry about that. So the first question was—
Excuse me, Michael, I was trying to ask Tommy about that. There's been crosstalk now for several minutes. I don't know who's talking on the phone or having a conversation at your place, but stop it.
Actually, I think it's.
Okay.
Michael, please continue.
I think it was an
Or Linda
echo
will-
from Tommy speaking. I would hear what she said and it would echo a few seconds later.
Yeah.
So anyway.
So I'm looking over at the chat. Oh, the 50 rivers. Did I publish that? I published them, and this will date them as blog posts. And then blogs went away. And so I had to rescue them from our system, and I reposted them as stories. And they do survive online, the reports at the time we went on the rivers. We considered writing a book, and actually had very much interest from Texas A&M University Press, who said we can finance this one with no trouble. But the college buddy and I that went on these trips, and he took pictures and I was writing things down, we didn't make a good writing team. And he lives in Houston and teaches, and I am here. So instead, what we ended up doing was a story for Texas Highways on two of the half-forgotten rivers in Texas, the James and the Pease rivers. And we revisited them and dug in more with people on the ground. When we did the 50 rivers the first time, we were just out there looking at stuff and writing it down and taking pictures of it. We really didn't talk to people. We're both ambiverts, half introvert, half extrovert. And so working for Texas Highways, we did do that. And you can find that online. It was a very popular story. And the other thing was about, newspapers and the future of print. Our business model keeps changing. As you know, the print industry collapsed about 15 years ago. And we lost a big bunch of our employees through attrition and furloughs and layoffs and early retirements. So building wide, I would say we outsourced a lot of things like printing. So building wide, I would say we're at about 20% of our peak employment. We're of course leaving the location on South the South Shore, which we never owned. The Cox family owned that land, and they're got some big development plan for it. But we're not part of any of that. We are moving in July to a plain but very nifty little office building that's being built for us in the Met Center, which is a development near the airport. As for the different ways in which we sustain the reporting that we do now, and we still have the biggest newsroom in the city. We're still, and we still are profitable, I have to say. Probably shouldn't say that. But we have the print edition, and we have about 50,000 subscribers daily and 75,000 on Sundays. Now that may seem like a lot, but we're a market of 2 million people. So we're really not reaching that many people by print. We reach a lot of people at statesman.com and austin360.com, but a lot of them are reading us very casually. They're reading one story here, one story there. And for a while, the idea was metering, or actually for a while, the idea was online advertising, and that's where we would make up our losses elsewhere. But then you can thank Google and Facebook for, tying up that end of the advertising world completely. And they change their algorithms every minute, and we can't compete with that. So our new company, we've been bought and sold twice in the last couple of years. Our new company is called Gannett, and it's an old newspaper company, and it's almost only about newspapers. And we have 300 newsrooms and about 500 publications. And all of our efforts are now blended in with our regional Gannett force, and also the national force. Our flagship paper is USA Today, which is a lot better newspaper than it used to be. I had not read it in a long time until they bought us, or we bought them, but they became the head newspaper on our chain. But the new strategy is digital-only subscriptions. If we can sell a certain number of digital-only subscriptions, we can break even and have a stable base. And then advertising is profit. And we also we're doing just great business on events. Before the pandemic, and then that went away. But in terms of what you can expect to see in the future as a consumer, print isn't going away. I can see a time when publishers will want to make print once a week, like only on Sundays. And I understand the reasoning. We only really get sustaining advertising in print on 2 days, Wednesday and Sunday. But I don't see that coming anytime soon either. All of our focus is on attracting people out there just to read our stories for free, trying to get them to do it more often, making them loyal to our brand, and then finally getting them to subscribe digitally. And it's incredibly cheap. I mean, right now it's $1 for 6 months. Obviously, it's going to be more when the 6 months is up, but the baseline will be now digital subscriptions, and there are a lot of things that are out there that are like that. I mean, even if you look at things like Netflix or whatever, Amazon, digital subscriptions are going to keep us going into the future. Anything else?
So that's what I'm paying for get a live paper, huh?
Yeah, actually, Michael, we do have a couple of other. There was a message in the chat from Mr. Burrow and with a question, or a couple of them. As Austin changes, what direction do you see us moving? With the increase of property sales and home values, how would you describe the Austin of 2030 or 2035? Is there still room for a middle class given the price of land and housing?
I think land use is a very good question. Land use will be an ongoing point of discussion in our city. And I think that we do have to look at more density. We do have to look at transportation. We do have to look at, we can't keep the tech companies from moving here. They just love us, and we're not offering them, any kind of, we're not dangling any gifts out to them. The state is, but we're not as a city, haven't yet for a while. So what do we do? I think that Austin is going to be a destination point in the middle of the country for a long time. And I think that the fact that a lot of young people have moved here, a lot of old people have moved here, have to do with the culture and with the way we treat each other, and the way that the excellent original grid of the 1939 plan, how it works downtown. And I'm glad we finally have some big transportation plans coming up. A small subway, got to start somewhere. You build subways for your great grandchildren, kind of like you plant trees for your great grandchildren. The subway, we're not going to be using it. It's going to be down the road. But the question in the meantime is, can we revisit some of the simple solutions that were there all along, and some of us were saying what we need to do? Can something like a pandemic help us? And in fact, in terms of traffic, it can. I've been saying all along, if people just lived where they work and play and shop, I-35 would flow like water. And indeed, during the pandemic, it did. And so, and I understand currently about 20 to 30% of the people who can work at home want to continue to work at home. I work at home, look behind me, this is where I work. So, go in a couple times a week for meetings, but not at rush hour. And I think that's part of the answer, is just how do we change behavior, not how do we change property values or change the physical environment that we're living in. I love our house. I love our neighborhood. I'm not moving. Kip's not moving anytime soon. Sometime we'll have to move, or they'll carry us out or whatever. But we love this city and we love this neighborhood, and we lucked into buying here before the most recent booms. I don't know. Will the middle class, will the poor be able to live here? Is a good question. We have to keep finding ways to make that happen. There are a lot of nonprofits working on that, and I spent about 10 years reporting on nonprofits as the social columnist, and I have a great deal of faith in their ability to be nimble on these subjects and respond to them in a thoughtful way, in an effective way. We're building lots of affordable housing. We don't get a lot of news about that, but indeed we are building a lot of affordable housing. And I think there are going to be a lot of hybrid models where affordable housing is mixed in with other kinds. And it has to really be able to be sustainable over the long run. They made that mistake at the Miller development at the old airport of setting aside a lot of affordable housing, but then at a certain point, you then have to start paying property taxes on what it would be worth, at market rates, and that kind of cancels out the advantages. So.
So a couple of other questions, I think. So Mr. Pinnell, Jim Pinnell, I think if you want to go ahead and unmute to ask yours. Sorry, Mr. Pinelli, you're still muted. There we go.
About, can you hear me now, as the commercial says? Just incidentally, I was born, grew up in Bolton area in the 40s and 50s, about 2 blocks from where you live now.
Wow.
And I'm going to get to my question in a second, but my grandparents lived next door. We were all renters back then. It was a lower socioeconomic environment then. And the person who they rented from was tired of rent property and offered to sell the house that my grandparents lived in to them for $2,000. And of course, that might as well have been $1 million back then to them in the 40s. My question, though, that I was wanting to get to, I'm kind of interested in genealogy recently. And I had 5 uncles who worked at this Statesman, American Statesman. Most of them had 25, 30-year careers in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and in 1960. And I was wondering, I was wanting to do a little investigating about their careers they had with the newspaper, and I've run down on newspapers.com articles that appeared about them in the newspaper. But I was wondering, what would be the best way? Does the newspaper have archives that might, when COVID is over, be accessible? Or is the Austin Public History Center, or what's a good source when you want to kind of delve into relatives who actually were associated with the newspaper?
Well, you already are using the finest tool, which is newspapers.com. And it is, to historians, community historians, it is one of the great inventions of our time, because I know all of you remember this microfilm, and it wasn't searchable. You just had to keep cranking until you found something. Whereas nowadays you can just put in a word and go straight to 1943 and find out. So I would say that the History Center will have other things, but you already have the best resource at hand. What I would start doing is looking at other kinds of evidence, like gravestones and birth records and land records. And those are, a lot of them are available online. Find a grave, another great invention. I have not subscribed to ancestry.com, but they have all kinds of tools.
Yes,
The
I
History
use,
Center,
I use them, and they are excellent.
yeah, I got to do that someday. Newspapers.com is owned by ancestry.com, so it's all kind of in the family. But yeah, the History Center is not open, unfortunately, but their archivists will look for something for you, but that's very, you know, unless you know what you're looking for, you know. But I will say this, I would love to do a story on your family. I think that's a great story idea. So email me at mbarnes@statesman.com, because having 5 uncles that work for the Statesman, that's an easy story to say yes to.
Yeah, there's always been an argument, but most of them work in the production end, of course. Way back then, you know, typesetters and proofreaders and the kind of things you don't have anymore. I'll put
I know, but you have family lore, and you have a passion about it, and that in itself, I mean, you probably have family photos that no one's seen, never been published, and yeah, I'm as interested in the people doing the typesetting as the columnists whose faces are in the paper every day. I had a story last week on this production of Tosca, the opera, out at the racetrack that's coming up this week. And it was focused completely on the people behind the scenes, the technical director, the head of production, the CEO, not the singers or the people that are in the spotlight. And so I think people love reading those stories. I think they are they tell you a lot about the world around you.
Yeah, I enjoy a lot of the old stories that say that Cedar Choppers, some fellow wrote a book called the Cedar Choppers, who I remember from around Deep Caves and far south Austin. I'll put some of that together. And
Yeah, let's work on it together. That book, by the way, is written by Ken Roberts, and it's called Cedar Choppers, Life on the Edge of Nowhere, I think is what it's called, is the subtitle. Excellent book. He's a great guy. You should have him speak. Former professor at Southwestern and retired, but he brings his research skills to a subject that was part of his youth and part of his life. All these people who lived up in the hills that were living a life apart from the city of Austin. And I learned so much from that book. I could read it again.
Yeah, I can remember some of the family names he mentioned. Living in South Austin, I went to Travis High with some of his relatives.
Right.
Back when.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. That's very informative.
Michael, I do want to there is another posting in the chat, and then I just want to open up if there are any final questions. Mr. Burrow had posted his teacher salary is considered too high, but then by living, I guess, not big enough. And he notes, I hope we do not see the time that a teacher cannot live in the community they work in. And I'm curious too, I mean, having covered Austin over such a period of time, if you've seen those trends, have you seen anything come about an interest in, essential workers having some sort of support for actually making Austin more livable and more affordable? I mean, I know that there's been this interest in affordable housing, but to your knowledge, has there been any targeting about who might be appropriately matched with that?
There have been. I don't know of any success stories. I'll admit that. I know that has been part of the discussion all along, and I think that we get distracted by a lot of the side issues. It's funny looking back to my first paycheck as a teacher at Key Junior High in the 5th Ward in Houston, and in the late 70s, maybe $7,000. Teachers have been robbed for years. I mean, the essential, critical part of our economy and our culture and everything else, and we still underpay them. But yes, I know that there have been plans and discussions about that, and I know that some of these new affordable residences have that built into their idea. I can't tell you a successful example.
Michael, my first job after I graduated from UT in '50, undergraduate, my first job was $3,200 a year.
Look where you are now.
And I bet you were happy to make that money. I am Mr. Burrow. I just wanted to say hi to everybody. I am at school right now. I'm on my off period. I want to thank you, Mr. Barnes, for your time and hearing these stories and seeing these members of our community. I remember my first job working McDonald's, making $5.25 an hour, and I was happy to make that money because I was getting paid for my work. We have this idea of worth and being paid, and it's this concept of what am I worth? So as I try to teach these kids and get them to value their self-worth, I want to tell you that I value your time. I'm one of those people that likes the paper too, but I only get it on Sundays because I just don't have time to read it all. So I appreciate this time and y'all being here, and I wish y'all a great rest of your day. I'm going to get ready to go pick up my kid from daycare.
Righty.
Thank you for joining us, Mr. Burrow. Glad that you could, and good luck with those kids.
All right. Thank you all very much. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. All right. Well, Michael, if there are any other questions, I'm going to throw it out one more time to our listeners, the folks that are chimed in today. But thank you. Just one more quick review if there's any other questions.
Susan Natalie, has a question.
Michael, have you read all of those books that are behind you?
You know, I never know how to respond to that because I didn't, set this up as a set for Zoom conferences. This is our living room. This is about a third of our collection, and we generally try to keep it at about 3,500 books. And my husband is a book editor, and we're both thorough bibliophiles. And basically the question that we ask ourselves with every book in our house, because we've probably owned about 7,000 over the course of 30 years, is, will I read this again, or have I read it yet? But no, I have not read all of them, but I have carefully curated them in the sense of saying, this is something I definitely want to read, or I want to reread. And and of course, it's all rereading is as pleasurable and valuable as reading something for the first time. I picked up at our annual winter reading break, War and Peace. I couldn't remember anything about it. It's been 50 years since I read it, and if I did, and so it's just like starting over from scratch, and then I set it aside for a few weeks because I had some stuff to read for work, and I couldn't understand what was going on, so I had to start at the beginning. But yeah, I appreciate your noticing the books. They're not there for effect. That's how we live.
I know you love to read, so thank you.
You're welcome.
And thank you again. We do have one more question in the chat, and then I think we'll close it up. Let's see, Helen notes, Austin music history focuses so much on the Armadillo World headquarters. Is there an article that has dealt with pre-Armadillo Austin, like the Vulcan Gas Company and other clubs in the same time or previous time period?
Absolutely, and the Vulcan Gas Company probably deserves a really serious book of its own. It has come up several times in other books that I've read. Yeah, it was incredibly influential. I think the reason the Armadillo gets so much press is in part because a lot of people went there. It wasn't just open at night, and it had the big outdoor thing, and it was cheap, and also Eddie Wilson, who is a longtime leader there, is still around and still telling great stories. And I would tell you, read his book on the Armadillo World Headquarters. It is priceless. But this subject comes up on our podcast a lot because indeed, for at least for a certain age group, that era of the 70s is a touchstone for the explosion of music in the city, which, as Eddie tells it, is fabulous. He says, they changed the drinking age, and they changed the closing hour, all this legal stuff, and they changed the voting age all at the same time. And so you had all these young people going out for the first time. And so any place that had a concrete pad big enough for a band was a live music venue all of a sudden. And you don't think of that, you think of it as always a very cultural thing. It was part of our the way we saw ourselves. Well, it also was, a change in the law. And we just recorded a podcast on Austin and the Jazz Age. And it was very much like the 70s in that, we were coming out of a war, we were coming out of a pandemic, we had all this explosion of kind of new liberation. Women could vote, and we also had racial tensions, very high level of racial tensions back then. But could have been today. And they had sex, drugs, and jazz, and the automobile was a huge thing then, because you could get away from your parents' house or campus and go off and have some heavy petting. Sorry for the language, but that was what it was called back then. And there were outlaws, and there was a lot of venues, and it started mainly with the white students at the university going to East Austin and hearing jazz, and then starting their own bands. And as I like to remind people, the white kids could go to East Austin and hang out, but it was not vice versa. And so, but yeah, there are all kinds of pre-Armadillo music history in our city that should be explored more, and I think will be.
Michael, this is from someone who grew up in South Austin and was at Travis in the flower power age in the late 60s, and would regularly sneak out in the middle of the night at midnight and return home at 4 a.m. to go to the Vulcan. So I think then there were a lot of people that were there. So it would be of, I think, great interest to a lot of people.
You scammed. You are.
Yeah, a lot of people don't think of that of me now when they meet me. I've gotten so straight and so serious and so boring.
I'm sure you're not boring, but we all do change. And I spent a long time since I spent the night out at a club. So.
Well, Michael, I wanted to say just thank you so much again. It was lovely of you to give your time to us this afternoon. I wanted to thank everybody for their participation, and I would really love to have you back sometime when we can actually meet in person. And hopefully you'll be open to that. But if there is any follow-up, folks, please do contact the Capital City Village office. And Michael, I'll be sure to let folks know about the podcast and some other ways to get in touch with you. But really do appreciate hearing from you today.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks again. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.